Hey explorers, today's episode is a little bit chemistry, a little bit history, and a whole lot of awesome. We're going to do a science experiment that looks like it's straight out of a wizard's lab. See this blue potion? This is actually copper sulfate. And this ordinary iron screw is about to go on a magical journey where it's going to grow copper crystals right before our eyes. Sounds like magic, but it's actually just a chemical reaction, one that even the alchemists would have loved. First thing you might notice is that I'm wearing PPE, which is the gloves and the goggles. This is personal protective equipment, and I'm wearing it today because copper sulfate can be very irritating to your eyes, your skin, and it can be toxic if you accidentally eat any. This means that Walter and I are taking every precaution to make sure we're safe in the lab. Let's start our experiment with a question. What happens when we put an iron screw into a copper sulfate solution? In following with our scientific method, now is a great time to do some background research. What is copper sulfate anyway? We ordered some copper sulfate crystals in order to make our copper sulfate solution. We did this by adding 1/2 teaspoon of copper sulfate crystals to 100 milliliters of water. Our copper sulfate solution is a bright blue chemical containing copper ions, tiny bits of copper suspended in water. And here is our iron screw, made of, you guessed it explorers, iron. Now, one of the ways that I love to test if something is made of iron, which is the most magnetic metal on the planet Earth, is to put it next to a magnet. Here, I have a very powerful neodymium magnet to test out to see if it's iron. Yes, I would say that that qualifies. Yeah! Now, here's the fun part. In chemistry, some metals are stronger than others. We call that being more reactive. Iron is more reactive than copper, which means that iron likes to steal copper's spot. When we mix them together, iron displaces copper out of the solution and then takes its place. Scientists call this a single displacement reaction. But a long time ago, this was known as alchemy. In the Middle Ages, alchemists believed that they could turn regular metals like lead or iron into gold. They wore robes, they scribbled in secret notebooks, and they searched for a magical object called the Philosopher's Stone. They didn't find the stone, but they did help us discover what is now known as chemistry. Many of the tools and techniques that we use in chemistry today began with alchemy. Based on what we learned during our background research, we need to make a hypothesis as to what we think is going to happen when we put our iron screw into our copper sulfate. I think when we place our iron screw into our copper sulfate solution, the iron will displace the copper out of the liquid, and the copper will grow on the screw as red-brown copper crystals. Why? Because we know that iron is more reactive than copper, so it's able to displace it and take its spot. It's like a metal version of musical chairs. Except when the copper gets pushed out, it doesn't walk away, it grows on the screw. It's time to test our hypothesis like a scientist, or like a modern-day alchemist. The materials that you'll need for this experiment are copper sulfate solution. We had to make our own using copper sulfate crystals. Plus, you'll need a clear jar or glass so you can observe your experiment, and you'll need an iron screw. One of the things we loved about this experiment is that the longer you let it run, the more dramatic the results were. Those reddish flakes and crystals that you see, that is pure copper. It came out of the solution and formed on the nail as crystals. Now, this wasn't just mixing. This was a transformation. The iron didn't just sit in the solution. It forced the copper to leave the liquid and become solid again. Fun fact, this reaction is used in real-life metalwork and electroplating. In factories, they use similar processes to coat one metal with another. Sometimes it's to make things shinier, stronger, or rust-proof. So what you just did, it's the same science that's used to make jewelry, coins, and even some phones. The conclusions that can be drawn from our experiment is that yes, iron is more reactive than copper and is able to displace it out of the solution. And we grew real copper crystals on our screw. But actually, I have a fun question, which is the screw still magnetic? Oh, it is. Still very magnetic, explorers. It's not quite turning metal into gold, but it's real science and it's just as magical. Remember, science is meant to be shared. You can show off your copper-coated nail, you can draw a diagram of what happened, or you can make your own lab scroll like an alchemist. Want to impress your class? Tell them that you made copper crystals using a reaction called single displacement, and you learned it from alchemists and chemists. If you do this experiment at home or with your class and post anything on social media, remember to tag us so we can see how your experiment turned out. And don't forget to subscribe to Clayton's Exploration Station on YouTube and social media so you don't miss any of the fun in the lab. Plus, you can head over to explorationstation.net to find the downloadable worksheet for this experiment or other resources. You can also visit our Patreon page to find out how you can support our continued adventures in education. Whether you're a future chemist or just someone who loves a little mystery, remember, the magic of science is real and it's in your hands. Thanks for exploring with me, and until next time, you stay curious and a little mysterious.
Clayton's Exploration Station.